The stellar Pioneer glided smoothly through the stars, its sleek metal hull cutting through the void of space. Captain Jace Anderson stood on the bridge, staring at the flickering lights of distant stars on the view screen. The ship was a small research vessel, traveling through unexplored space to study planets no one had visited in centuries. Jace's crew, a group of curious and intelligent scientists, had been on this mission for months. But they were about to find something that would change everything. "This is the last sector on the map," Lieutenant Harris said, standing beside the captain. "If we don't find anything interesting here, we'll head back to the core systems." Jace nodded but didn't say anything. He had a feeling that this part of the galaxy would hold something important, something that no one else had discovered. The feeling was growing stronger as they approached a small, forgotten planet. It wasn't even marked on most star maps. Only a few records from ancient explorers mentioned it, and they all seemed to be riddled with warnings about dangerous conditions. The planet came into view. It was covered in vast deserts and rocky canyons, with no signs of life. The crew prepared to land, unsure of what they would find. As the ship descended into the atmosphere, the instruments started to pick up strange readings. There was something buried beneath the surface, a structure large and complex. "Captain, you need to see this," Harris called out, his voice filled with surprise. Jace walked over to the console, his boots clicking on the metal floor. The radar displayed a faint but unmistakable signal. An ancient city, buried under centuries of dust. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before. The design was alien, yet somehow familiar. Strange symbols etched into stone and towering structures that reached for the sky, their edges crumbling with age. "Prepare the landing party," Jace ordered, excitement in his voice. "We're going down." The crew suited up in their environmental gear and boarded the small transport pod that would take them to the planet's surface. As the pod dropped from the stellar Pioneer, Jace couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. This was what they had been searching for, an untouched piece of history, a lost civilization waiting to be uncovered. The landing was smooth, and as the dust settled around them, Jace and his team stepped out onto the cracked, dry ground. The planet's atmosphere was thin, and the air felt cool and dry against their skin. The towering ruins stood before them, a silent testament to a forgotten past. "Do you think anyone's still here?" asked Dr. Ilarin Nguyen, the lead scientist. She was scanning the area with her equipment, trying to pick up any signs of life. "I don't know," Jace replied, his voice serious. "But we need to find out. Let's move out." The team walked cautiously toward the entrance of the ancient city. The architecture was both beautiful and eerie. Massive stone walls lined with intricate carvings, doors that looked too large for any ordinary person to walk through, and arches that seemed to defy the laws of physics. It was clear that whoever had built this place had been incredibly advanced. As they walked deeper into the city, they found signs of something troubling. Some of the walls were cracked, as if the city had been shaken by a great force. In several places, the ground had caved in, revealing dark, empty spaces below. It was as though something had caused this once great civilization to collapse, leaving nothing behind but memories. "This place feels abandoned," Ilara said, her voice filled with a hint of unease. "But something about it doesn't sit right." Jace paused and looked around. He could feel it too, a strange energy in the air, like they were being washed. But the city was silent. There were no signs of movement, no voices, no sounds at all. They continued their exploration, moving deeper into the heart of the city. As they approached a large open plaza, Jace noticed something strange. In the center of the plaza stood a large stone monument, its surface covered in symbols and markings. It was unlike anything they had seen before. The language was alien, but it was clear that it was meant to tell a story, a history that had been lost over time. "Captain, look!" Harris called out from the far side of the plaza. Jace turned to see him standing in front of a dark doorway, partially hidden by vines and debris. There was a faint light coming from within. "What do you think it is?" Ilar asked, stepping closer. "I don't know," Jace said, his voice low. "But we're about to find out." They approached the doorway cautiously, their footsteps echoing through the hollow city. As they stepped inside, the air grew colder and a faint humming sound filled the room. There, in the center of the chamber, they found something that took their breath away. It was a woman, an alien woman, lying in a deep slumber. Her skin was pale, her hair long and silver, and her clothes were like nothing they had ever seen before. She appeared to be in some kind of stasis, untouched by time. But what was she doing here? And who was she? Jace's heart raced. This discovery would change everything. They had found something, or someone, important. But the questions were only beginning. The stellar pioneer glided smoothly through the stars, its sleek metal hull cutting through the void of space. Captain Jace Anderson stood on the bridge, staring at the flickering lights of distant stars on the view screen. The ship was a small research vessel, traveling through unexplored space to study planets no one had visited in centuries. Jace's crew, a group of curious and intelligent scientists, had been on this mission for months, but they were about to find something that would change everything. "This is the last sector on the map," Lieutenant Harris said, standing beside the captain. "If we don't find anything interesting here, we'll head back to the core systems." Jace nodded but didn't say anything. He had a feeling that this part of the galaxy would hold something important, something that no one else had discovered. The feeling was growing stronger as they approached a small, forgotten planet. It wasn't even marked on most star maps. Only a few records from ancient explorers mentioned it, and they all seemed to be riddled with warnings about dangerous conditions. The planet came into view. It was covered in vast deserts and rocky canyons, with no signs of life. The crew prepared to land, unsure of what they would find. As the ship descended into the atmosphere, the instruments started to pick up strange readings. There was something buried beneath the surface, a structure large and complex. "Captain, you need to see this," Harris called out, his voice filled with surprise. Jace walked over to the console, his boots clicking on the metal floor. The radar displayed a faint but unmistakable signal. An ancient city, buried under centuries of dust. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before. The design was alien, yet somehow familiar. Strange symbols etched into stone and towering structures that reached for the sky, their edges crumbling with age. "Prepare the landing party," Jace ordered, excitement in his voice. "We're going down." The crew suited up in their environmental gear and boarded the small transport pod that would take them to the planet's surface. As the pod dropped from the stellar pioneer, Jace couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. This was what they had been searching for, an untouched piece of history, a lost civilization waiting to be uncovered. The landing was smooth, and as the dust settled around them, Jace and his team stepped out onto the cracked, dry ground. The planet's atmosphere was thin, and the air felt cool and dry against their skin. The towering ruins stood before them, a silent testament to a forgotten past. "Do you think anyone's still here?" asked Dr. Ilar Nguyen, the lead scientist. She was scanning the area with her equipment, trying to pick up any signs of life. "I don't know," Jace replied, his voice serious. "But we need to find out. Let's move out." The team walked cautiously toward the entrance of the ancient city. The architecture was both beautiful and eerie. Massive stone walls lined with intricate carvings, doors that looked too large for any ordinary person to walk through, and arches that seemed to defy the laws of physics. It was clear that whoever had built this place had been incredibly advanced. As they walked deeper into the city, they found signs of something troubling. Some of the walls were cracked, as if the city had been shaken by a great force. In several places, the ground had caved in, revealing dark, empty spaces below. It was as though something had caused this once great civilization to collapse, leaving nothing behind but memories. "This place feels abandoned," Ilara said, her voice filled with a hint of unease. "But something about it doesn't sit right." Jace paused and looked around. He could feel it too, a strange energy in the air, like they were being washed. But the city was silent. There were no signs of movement, no voices, no sounds at all. They continued their exploration, moving deeper into the heart of the city. As they approached a large open plaza, Jace noticed something strange. In the center of the plaza stood a large stone monument, its surface covered in symbols and markings. It was unlike anything they had seen before. The language was alien, but it was clear that it was meant to tell a story, a history that had been lost over time. "Captain, look," Harris called out from the far side of the plaza. Jace turned to see him standing in front of a dark doorway, partially hidden by vines and debris. There was a faint light coming from within. "What do you think it is?" Ilara asked, stepping closer. "I don't know," Jace said, his voice low. "But we're about to find out." They approached the doorway cautiously, their footsteps echoing through the hollow city. As they stepped inside, the air grew colder and a faint humming sound filled the room. There, in the center of the chamber, they found something that took their breath away. It was a woman, an alien woman, lying in a deep slumber. Her skin was pale, her hair long and silver, and her clothes were like nothing they had ever seen before. She appeared to be in some kind of stasis, untouched by time. But what was she doing here? And who was she? Jace's heart raced. This discovery would change everything. They had found something, or someone, important. But the questions were only beginning. Zyla sat quietly on a bench inside the Stellar Pioneer's medical bay, her hands resting in her lap. The soft hum of the ship filled the room as Dr. Ilaran Nguyen carefully checked her vitals once more. The alien woman had been awake for hours now, but she still seemed dazed, as if she couldn't quite believe that she was no longer in the dark, cold chamber where she had been trapped for so long. Jace stood at the window, watching the stars drift by as the ship left the forgotten planet behind. It felt strange, knowing they had discovered an entire lost civilization, and one of its last survivors. His mind kept returning to the same question. Why had Zilla's people been abandoned? And why had she been left to sleep in stasis for centuries? They needed answers, but it would take time to uncover the full story. "Captain, I think we've stabilized her," Ilara said, breaking his train of thought. "But she needs more than just medical care. She needs to process what's happened to her people." Jace nodded. "I know. I think it's going to take time for her to trust us, to really believe that we want to help." Ilara hesitated, looking at Zyla. "She's been through a lot. We're strangers to her. She might still think we're just another group that will leave her behind." Zilla had been quiet for the past few minutes, her gaze distant as she stared out the small window at the stars. It was clear she was lost in thought, probably thinking about her lost people, her home, and everything that had been torn away from her. Jace sat down across from her, trying to be gentle with his words. "Zyla, I know this is a lot to take in, but we want to help. You don't have to do this alone anymore." Zilla turned slowly to face him, her silver eyes searching his face as if she was looking for some sign of truth, something that would show her he wasn't just another fleeting stranger. "You say you want to help," she replied softly, "but my people, they're all gone. There's no going back. What can you possibly do?" Jace leaned forward, his expression sincere. "We can't undo what's been done, but we can help you rebuild. There's a lot we don't know, but we'll do everything we can to help you find others like you, if they're out there. Maybe you're not the last after all." Zyla's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I want to believe that. I do, but I've spent so many years alone, lost. It's hard to hope again." Jace paused, understanding her pain. He couldn't imagine what it must feel like to wake up after so long, to find everything familiar gone. But he also knew something important. Hope could be reignited, even in the darkest places. "You've been strong enough to survive this long," Jace said quietly. That's not something to ignore. And if you're willing to trust us, we'll help you carry that strength forward. Zyla looked down at her hands, the weight of her words hanging in the air. What if there's no one else? What if I really am the last of my people? Ilara, who had been quietly listening from the doorway, stepped forward. There's a chance we can find more answers. This planet, your city, it's all still a mystery. We've only just begun to uncover it. We can search for any other survivors or remnants of your people's civilization. Zyla nodded slowly, absorbing their words. I will need time, she said softly. But maybe I can try to hope again. Jace smiled gently. Take all the time you need. But just know, we'll be here for you. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. The ship continued its journey through the stars, but Jace couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the edge of something much bigger than they had imagined. Zyla's people, who were they? What had happened to them? And why had the galaxy turned its back on them? Over the next few days, Jace and his crew worked tirelessly, collecting more data from the planet where they had found Zyla. Ilara spent hours deciphering the alien symbols, hoping to unlock some of the mysteries hidden in the city's ruins. Meanwhile, Zyla, though still quiet and reflective, began to open up. She told Jace about her homeworld, about the grandeur of her people's civilization, and the peace they once enjoyed. I was to be their leader, Zyla said one evening, her voice filled with a sadness that Jace could hear even in the quietest moments. But I failed. The war destroyed everything. My people fought amongst themselves, and the Zephyrians. They took everything from us. Who are the Zephyrians? Jace asked, wanting to understand more. They were once allies, Zyla explained. But something changed. They grew hungry for power, and soon they betrayed us. The war lasted for generations, and in the end, we were wiped out. I was sent into stasis to preserve our history. But I never thought I'd wake up alone. The sadness in her voice was undeniable, but there was also a sense of determination that Jace could feel, even now. Zyla might have been broken by what happened to her people, but she was not without hope, not completely. Zyla, you're not alone anymore, Jace repeated. We're going to find out what happened. And if there are any survivors, we'll help them too. Zyla looked up at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and uncertainty. You'll help us. Jace nodded firmly. We will. And in that moment, Zyla realized that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for her people to rise again. If only she could believe in it. Days passed, and the Stellar Pioneer continued its journey deeper into the unknown regions of space. Zyla, now more awake and aware, spent much of her time in the ship's observation room, gazing out at the endless stars. She had started to open up more to Jace and the crew, sharing stories of her world, the peace they once had, and the destruction that followed. Despite the pain in her voice, there was a spark of hope that began to grow, just as Jace had promised. Ilara had been hard at work in the ship's lab, analyzing the data they had gathered from the abandoned city on Zola's planet. The ancient symbols, the technology, and the hidden chambers. There was so much to uncover. They all knew it was a crucial step toward understanding the fate of Zyla's people and discovering whether anyone else had survived. Jace stood beside Ilara, watching her work on the holographic display. Any luck with the translation? He asked. It's slow, Ilara replied, tapping a few buttons on her console. The language is complex, but I think I've found something. There's mention of a sanctuary, a place where survivors were sent in case of a war. It could be important. A sanctuary. Jace raised an eyebrow. Is there any indication of where it might be? Ilara frowned, her fingers flying over the keys. There's no exact location, but based on the data, I think it might be somewhere in the Outer Rim. It's not far, but it's also uncharted territory. We'll need to be careful. We're always careful, Jace said with a grin, though it was clear he was eager to follow this new lead. If there was a chance of finding more survivors, they couldn't pass it up. Meanwhile, Zyla stood by the window in the observation room, her mind racing. The idea of a sanctuary, a place where her people could have been saved, was both a blessing and a curse. What if it was empty, just like the rest of her world? What if the sanctuary had been destroyed too? The fear of discovering nothing was almost too much to bear, but she couldn't let that stop her. She had to try. Jace entered the room and stood beside her, his presence calming. "You okay?" he asked gently. Zilla turned to face him, her expression a mixture of uncertainty and hope. "I don't know what to feel. A sanctuary sounds like a dream, but what if it's just another empty place?" Jace nodded. He understood her doubt. "I know it's scary, but we have to try. Even if we don't find what we hope for, at least we'll know we did everything we could." Zilla hesitated, then took a deep breath. "You're right. I have to keep going. For them. For my people." Jace smiled, proud of her strength. "That's the spirit. We'll make sure you're not alone in this." With renewed determination, Zyla joined the crew in the ship's main control room. The search for the sanctuary was now their primary mission. The journey would be long, and the unknowns were many, but it was the best chance they had of finding more answers. As the Stellar Pioneer charted its course to the outer rim, Ilara continued her work with the ancient data, carefully piecing together the fragments of information. The ship's crew, a mix of humans and Zyla, worked together to prepare for the challenges ahead. There was no turning back now. Weeks passed, and the crew encountered various obstacles: asteroid fields, strange energy disturbances, and unexplained spatial anomalies. But they pressed on. Each day brought them closer to the unknown region of space where the sanctuary was believed to be located. The journey was beginning to take its toll. Tensions were high, but there was also a shared sense of purpose that kept them going. One evening, as Zyla sat at a table in the ship's dining area, looking out at the stars, she felt a moment of peace. It was fleeting, but it was enough to remind her that there was hope. She had left her past behind on that ruined planet, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was a future waiting for her and her people. Jace entered the room, his expression thoughtful. "I was thinking about something. If we find the sanctuary, and there are survivors, what happens next? What will they need?" Zyla looked up at him, her eyes full of emotion. "They'll need everything. They'll need to rebuild. And they'll need to know they're not alone, that the galaxy hasn't forgotten them." Jace nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "We'll be there for them. We'll help them rebuild. You've already shown that you have the strength to survive. Together, we can help your people stand tall again." Zyla's heart ached at the thought of her people, so scattered and broken. But for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a future where they could rise again. A future where she wasn't the last of her kind. Just as Jace was about to speak again, the ship's alarms blared, cutting through the silence. The crew rushed to their stations, and the sense of urgency returned. Ilara's voice crackled over the intercom. "Captain, we've picked up something on the scanners. There's an uncharted planet nearby. It might be what we're looking for." Jace turned to Zilla, who was already moving toward the control room. "Ready?" he asked. Zyla's eyes were steady, her voice unwavering. "Ready." As the Stellar Pioneer approached the planet, the crew could only hope that this was the place they had been searching for. The sanctuary, the last chance for Zola's people. The next step in their journey had begun. The Stellar Pioneer descended into the atmosphere of the mysterious planet, its engines humming with a steady pulse. As it broke through the clouds, the crew gazed out of the windows in awe. The planet was nothing like the barren world Zyla had come from. Lush forests, sparkling rivers, and towering mountains stretched across the landscape as far as the eye could see. "This is incredible," Jace murmured, leaning over the controls with Ilara. "Who knew something like this was out here?" "It's not on any map," Ilara replied, her fingers moving across the console, scanning for any signs of civilization. "And there's no record of it in any of the archives. It's as if it's been hidden on purpose." Zilla stood beside them, her heart pounding in her chest. Could this be the sanctuary? Could it really be the place where her people had once hoped to find refuge? The ship touched down in a clearing, the engines powering down as the crew prepared to disembark. Zilla stood silently, gathering her thoughts. The planet's beauty was overwhelming, but she couldn't let herself be distracted. This could be the key to saving her people, but it could also be a trap. She had to stay focused. Jace, always the optimist, gave her a reassuring smile. "We'll take it slow. No surprises. We'll be in and out." Zilla nodded, though a small part of her wasn't so sure. It was hard to shake the feeling that something was waiting, something just out of sight. The crew gathered their supplies, scanners, weapons for protection, and communication devices, before heading into the dense forest. The air was fresh and clean, and the sounds of wildlife filled the air, but it all felt strangely quiet. Even the birds seemed to hush as they moved through the trees, almost as though they knew something was different about this place. As they walked deeper into the forest, Ilara pulled up a map of the region. According to the coordinates from the data, there should be a structure up ahead. It's not far. Zilla quickened her pace, her eyes scanning the horizon. Could it be? Could they finally be getting closer to the answers she so desperately needed? After an hour of walking, they reached a clearing, and before them stood a massive stone structure. It was ancient, its surface weathered by time, but it still stood tall and proud. The doors were massive, adorned with intricate carvings that Zilla recognized immediately. It was the same language as the symbols they had found on her home planet, the language of her people. "This is it," Zilla whispered, her voice filled with awe. Jace stepped forward and placed his hand on the stone. "Looks like this place has been untouched for a long time. Let's see what's inside." With a low rumble, the large stone doors began to move. It took a few moments, but eventually they creaked open, revealing a vast, dimly lit hall. The air inside was cool and stale, as if no one had entered for centuries. Dust hung in the air, catching the light from their flashlights. Inside, they found rows of ancient technology, devices that Zilla couldn't even begin to understand. Yet they were clearly designed for her people. There were still signs of life in the space, though. The walls were lined with murals depicting scenes of peace, prosperity, and what looked like the migration of a people. Zilla couldn't help but feel a wave of emotion. This place had once been the heart of her civilization. "I've never seen anything like this," Ilara said, her voice filled with wonder. "This could be the key to everything. If we can figure out how to activate this technology, we might be able to bring your people back." Zilla felt a surge of hope. She had never allowed herself to imagine a future where her people could return, but now it seemed possible. But there was still so much to learn. They spent hours exploring the structure, finding more and more evidence that this had been a safe haven, a place designed to protect and preserve her people. As they ventured deeper, they came across what looked like a control room. It was lined with strange terminals and glowing crystals, their purpose unclear. "We need to get this working," Jace said. "This is where we'll find the answers. This is where we'll find out what happened to your people." Zilla moved closer to the main terminal, her heart racing. Could this be it? Could this be the moment when everything changed? Ilara worked quickly, her fingers flying over the controls. "If I can just get this connected to the ship's systems, we might be able to unlock whatever's here." Minutes turned into hours, and just as Zilla was beginning to lose hope, Ilara's voice broke through the silence. "Got it. I'm accessing the data now." On the screen in front of them, a series of holographic images flickered to life. They showed a fleet of ships, each one flying toward the planet, bringing with it the last of Zilla's people. The holograms showed them entering the sanctuary, safe and protected. But there was a twist. The last image showed the fleet leaving, the sanctuary doors closing, and a single ship, the one Zilla now stood in, departing, carrying with it the final hopes of her people. Zilla's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. They left. Why did they leave? Ilara looked at the screen in shock. I don't know, but we need to find out. This isn't over yet. The screen before Zilla flickered with more images, each more puzzling than the last. The last few moments of the holographic sequence seemed to show her people, those who had once lived on this planet, leaving with grim determination. They weren't running, at least, not in the way Zyla had thought. They were leaving willingly, almost as if they had chosen to go. Why did they leave? Zyla asked aloud, her voice trembling with confusion. What happened to them? Ilara moved closer to the screen, her face lit by the soft glow of the holograms. There's more here, Zyla. There's a second part of the file. Let me access it. Zyla stood frozen, her mind racing. Everything she had believed about her people, everything she had been told about their downfall, now felt like a lie. They hadn't been abandoned. They had left on their own. But why? Ilara's fingers moved quickly, tapping on the console. For a few moments, nothing happened. Then, with a soft beep, the next holographic image began to form. This one was clearer than the others, showing a fleet of ships moving through space. The ships were in perfect formation, led by one particularly large and imposing vessel. As the image zoomed in, Zyla's eyes widened. The ship in the front was unmistakable. This was the ship her people had used when they first left their home. But something was wrong. The ship was no longer flying alone. There were strange, alien ships surrounding it, their shapes unfamiliar, their designs unlike anything Zyla had ever seen. They weren't just leaving, Zyla whispered, as the truth began to settle in. They were being followed. Jace, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. You think they were in danger? Zyla nodded, unable to tear her eyes away from the scene unfolding before her. Yes, something, or someone, was after them. They were trying to escape, to protect themselves. Ilara studied the image carefully. But if they were running from something, why didn't they come here? Why not seek refuge on this planet? The answer came to Zilla in a sudden rush. They couldn't. She looked at the console, her mind piecing together the images and the fragments of information she had gathered. The planet was too important. This wasn't just a sanctuary, it was a trap. They knew something was out there, something dangerous. They couldn't let that danger find this place. Jace ran a hand through his hair. So they left to protect this planet. Zilla nodded again. And the only way they could protect it was to leave it behind. They had to make sure that no one knew about this place, that no one could reach it. The weight of the truth pressed heavily on Zola's chest. She had come here looking for answers, but now the answers felt more like a burden. Her people had sacrificed everything to keep this planet safe, to keep their history and their technology hidden from the wrong hands. Where did they go? Zyla asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ilara continued to work on the console, trying to access more of the data. I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Minutes passed in tense silence as Ilara scrolled through the data, her eyes scanning each line. Finally, she looked up, her face pale. They didn't just leave. They were. She stopped herself, her eyes wide with shock. Zyla. They were erased. Zyla's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Ilara swallowed hard, her fingers trembling on the console. The ships, the people, they vanished. There's no trace of them. It's like they were completely wiped from the galaxy. No records, no transmissions. They were erased from existence. The room felt suddenly colder. Zyla's mind reeled as she tried to process what Ilara had just said. How could a people simply vanish? How could they be wiped from history like that? Jace stepped forward, his face hard with determination. This doesn't make sense. They had to leave a trail, some kind of trace. We need to find out what really happened. Zilla closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. I need to know, she said softly. I have to know what happened to them. I have to know if there's any chance of bringing them back. Ilara nodded, her fingers moving swiftly across the console. "I'll keep searching. There has to be something here that can explain all of this." But as Ilara worked, Zyla couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. It was as if something, or someone, was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. She looked over her shoulder, her instincts screaming that danger was close. Jace noticed her tension. "What is it?" "I don't know," Zyla replied, her voice quiet. "But I don't think we're alone here. I think this place is hiding something more than just the truth about my people." Before anyone could respond, a sound echoed through the corridors of the ancient structure, soft at first, then louder, like footsteps approaching. Zyla's heart raced. Whatever was out there, it was coming for them. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the dark, hollow halls. Zyla's breath hitched in her chest as she turned toward the door, her heart racing. Whatever, or whoever, was out there, she could feel the weight of its presence. The air felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. "Ilara, Jace, be ready," Zyla whispered, her eyes scanning the room for anything that could be used as a weapon. Her thoughts raced, trying to come up with a plan, but all she could think about was the strange feeling that something was waiting for them, something far more powerful than they were prepared for. Ilara's fingers hovered over the console, ready to hit the emergency button that would lock down the facility, but she hesitated. "We don't even know what we're up against," she muttered, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "We'll find out soon enough," Jace said, his voice firm but low. His eyes never left the dark hallway outside. He, too, could feel the presence drawing closer. The noise stopped suddenly, and the silence was deafening. It was as if the world itself had paused, waiting for something to happen. Zyla held her breath, waiting for the next sound, the next movement. And then, without warning, the door slid open. In the doorway stood a figure, a tall, slender being, its face obscured by a hood and a cloak that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. It wasn't human, that much was clear. Its presence felt otherworldly, almost ancient. The air around it seemed to warp, bending in strange, subtle ways. "Who are you?" Zyla demanded, taking a step forward, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "What do you want?" The figure stood motionless for a moment before it spoke, its voice deep and resonant, like a whisper carried by the wind. "I am not your enemy, Zyla of the Lost Race." Zyla's blood ran cold. The figure knew her name. But how? She had never seen it before. It didn't make sense. "I have been waiting for you," the figure continued, its voice echoing in the chamber. "You are the key to what has been hidden. You are the last hope for your people." Jace stepped forward, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon, but Zyla stopped him with a glance. There was something about the figure that didn't feel threatening. Yet, "What do you mean, the last hope?" Zyla asked, her voice shaky but determined. She needed answers. The figure raised one hand, and with a simple gesture, the lights in the room flickered. The walls around them seemed to shift, and suddenly, the entire room was filled with new holograms. Images of planets, of star systems, and of a great cosmic war that spanned across the galaxy. "This is your people's history," the figure explained, its tone somber. "It was erased, hidden, because your ancestors made a decision. They knew that the threat to your race was too great, and so they made the ultimate sacrifice. By erasing their existence from the galaxy, by fading into nothingness, they ensured that your kind would survive." Zyla's mind raced as she tried to process the information. But why? Why erase everything? Why not fight back? The enemy was too powerful. The figure replied, its voice carrying the weight of untold history. "They were not like the others you have faced. They were an ancient race, older than most civilizations. Their power was unmatched. Your ancestors chose to disappear in order to protect this planet, their home, and to protect the future. But why didn't they return?" Zyla asked, her voice a whisper. Why leave us like this? The figure lowered its head, as if weighed down by the sorrow of the answer. The path they took was one of isolation. To ensure your safety, they sealed themselves away from the rest of the galaxy. They were not meant to return, at least, not until the time was right. Until the time was right. Ilara echoed, her voice filled with disbelief. But why now? Why are you here? The figure turned its gaze toward Ilara, and for a moment, Xyla felt the weight of its stare. Because the time has come, it said softly. The threat that once drove your people to hide is returning. It has found a way to break the barrier, to find this planet. Your people left behind a key, a way to defeat them. And Zilla, you are the one to unlock it. Xyla's heart skipped a beat. Me? But I don't know how. The figure nodded. You don't need to know everything. The key is within you, hidden deep in your memory. It is your birthright, passed down from your ancestors. You must remember. Xyla felt a surge of energy, like a flood of memories trying to break through. Images flashed before her eyes. Her people, their ships, their great city. She saw their faces, their determination. She saw the moment they made the decision to disappear, the moment they sealed themselves away. And then everything clicked. She understood. She knew what she had to do. Where do we begin? Xyla asked, her voice steady, her resolve clear. The figure stepped back, gesturing to the vast expanse of holograms. The journey begins here, with the knowledge your people left behind. You must go to the place where the barrier was first created. It is there you will find the answers. With one last glance at the figure, Xyla turned to Ilara and Jace. Together, they would follow the path set before them, no longer just seeking the truth, but ready to face the ancient enemy and to reclaim the future of her people.